kiddos. This is old Grammy Kate reading The Enormous Egg. We're on chapter 6 today. I hope everybody's well, and if you're one of my grandkids, I hope you are happy, and if you're not, I hope you're happy too. So here's chapter 6. After church, I saw Joe Chapigny out in his backyard. I went over to talk to him. "Hey, Joe," I said, "guess what hatched out of my egg?" "A duck?" Joe asked. "Nope." "A turkey?" "Nope." "I'll give you a hint. It's got 4 legs." Joe looked at me and wrinkled up his face. 2 ducks? I could see that he wasn't going to get anywhere that way, so I told him, "It's a dinosaur. A real little live dinosaur. What do you think of that?" "Oh, go on," Joe said. "Who are you kidding?" "Honest, it is," Joe said. "Oh, honest, it is," I said. "Come on over and look at it. It's got little horns on its face and everything." We went across the street into our backyard and squatted down by the dinosaur nest. Joe didn't see him at first, but then, and here they are, squatting down by the dinosaur's nest. Then his eyes got accustomed to the dark. "Jeepers, it's a big lizard," he said, kind of drawing back a little. "You mean that all came out of the egg? Is he poisonous?" "He sure looks poisonous to me." "I don't know," I said. "I hadn't thought of that before. I'd have to ask Dr. Zemer about it. He didn't seem poisonous." "What you gonna feed him?" Joe wanted to know. "I don't know that either," I said, "but I'll find out, and then I'll tame him, and he'll be about the only pet dinosaur in the whole world, I bet." "That's no dinosaur," Joe Chapigny said. "It's just a big lizard. Where'd you get that idea anyway, that it was a dinosaur?" "Dr. Zemer said it was, and he's a paleo something, and he works in a museum, and he knows all about dinosaurs and things like that. Really, he does. He knew the egg was going to hatch out, and he knew what kind of egg it was, too." Joe put his hands on his hips and shook his head slowly, back and forth. "You know what I think," he said. "He's just making fun of you. These summer people think they're awfully smart, and they think that just because we live up here in Freedom, New Hampshire, we don't know anything. They think we're all suckers for jokes like this. That's what my dad says." Just then we heard Joe's mother calling him. "Jeepers," Joe said. "I forgot all about the stove wood. See you later." I didn't agree with what Joe said about Dr. Zemer. He didn't look like the kind of man who'd play a trick like that. And he looked too excited when he first saw the thing, and he sent a telegram to Washington too, or at least he had us send one. After Dr. Zemer drove up in his car, he walked out to the backyard where I was sitting, watching the dinosaur. "Hello there, Nate," he said. "How is our little freak? Still lively?" He bent down and looked inside the box to make sure for himself. "Yes, sir, he looks fine. Probably hungry, too. We'd better get him his first meal, Nate." "What does he eat?" I said. "Do we have to feed him milk out of a baby's bottle?" Dr. Zemer laughed at that. "Oh, no, Nate, we don't have to bottle feed a dinosaur. You see, dinosaurs are reptiles, like snakes and turtles. And when they hatch out of the egg, they're all ready to eat the same kind of food that adults eat. The kind of dinosaur the Triceratops is a grass eater. So all we have to do is keep him supplied with grass and leaves, or lily pads, or lettuce, and a few small pebbles every now and then." "Pebbles?" I said. "Does he eat pebbles?" Dr. Zemer smiled. What kind of teeth does a chicken have, Nate? Doesn't have teeth, I said. They just have little stones in their gizzard. Say, do you mean a dinosaur has a gizzard like a chicken? Some of them do. When scientists dug up dinosaur bones, they sometimes found a pile of smooth stones right in the middle of the dinosaur's skeleton. They didn't know what they were at first until it suddenly dawned on them that they were gizzard stones. Some of the stones were as big as a man's fist. Seems funny for an animal to have a gizzard, I said. No funnier than for a chicken to have one, is it? Well, let's try him out on some grass and some leaves and see what he likes better. We picked some maple leaves from the tree in the yard, and I got a handful of grass from outside the fence. We put them down in 2 piles, grass in one, leaves in the other. And we carefully put the nest box on its side so the dinosaur could come out if he wanted. Then we sat down and watched. The little dinosaur saw the piles of food, I guess, because he started right out for them. His legs looked kind of weak at first, and he stumbled around a little. Then when he came out into the sunshine, he blinked, but he kept right on going. The first pile he came to was the grass. He put his head right down into the green grass and started swallowing away at it. I guess he likes grass all right, I said. The little fellow kept right on swallowing until the handful of grass was all gone. And here's a picture of him. Can you see that? All that was left was a blade of grass hanging out of the corner of his mouth, which he hadn't noticed yet. Then he wobbled over to the pile of leaves and started in on that. I guess he likes leaves too, Dr. Zemer said. Look at him eat, will you? He's just about finished it up already. I ran over and got some more grass and another handful of leaves. Put them all together in one pile, Dr. Zemer said, and then we'll see what he picks out first. But he didn't stop to pick things out. He just ate his way through the pile. And when it was all gone, he stood on 3 legs and scratched his neck with his hind foot. Then he walked over to a smooth, sunny place and lay down. Well, Dr. Zemer said, with an appetite like this, he's going to have us humping to keep him supplied with food. Too bad we can't put him in the pasture, but he's too small for that. He'd crawl through the fence, or maybe the goat would hurt him. She's a very gentle goat, I said. She wouldn't even hurt a kitten. Maybe not a kitten, but a dinosaur is something different. Animals get excited when they see something they haven't come across before. So can people, I guess. We'd better wait till this little fellow gets bigger before we put him in the pasture. By the way, we ought to be keeping a record of his growth. Do you happen to have some scales in the house? Sure, we have some in the kitchen. Mom doesn't ever use them. Shall we carry him in and weigh him? Well, perhaps it would be better policy to bring the scales out here, Dr. Zemer said. Women often have a prejudice against reptiles, you know, and we wouldn't want to cause any trouble. See if you can borrow the scales for a while. I have to say that this is a little bit prejudiced against women, don't you think? I think there are a lot of women who like reptiles. Anyway, we won't bother ourselves about that. Okay. I ran in and got the scales. When I told Mom what they were for, she said I could keep the scales outside. She didn't want to have anything in her kitchen that creature had touched. I guess Dr. Zemer was right. We put the scales down on the ground and we went over to pick up the animal. He had a bluish skin like a lizard's and a funny kind of a beak, something like a snapping turtle. Like a snapping turtle has. Of course, he didn't have that mean look like a snapper, but you can't ever be sure. I stood there for a moment looking at him. I wasn't scared to pick him up, but you see, I'd never handled a dinosaur before and I didn't know much about how to do it. Dr. Zemer was watching me. What's the matter, Nate? Does he look dangerous? I was just studying how I ought to get a hold of him, I said. He has a kind of sharp-looking mouth, and I'd just as soon not get my hands nipped. What do you think? Well, to tell the truth, I've never had to deal with any of these fellows when they were alive. My dinosaurs have all been just piles of old bones, and they never even tried to bite me. He came over and stood beside me. Let's just see how touchy he is. He put his foot out and gently poked one of the dinosaur's feet. The dinosaur sat up and looked around. He was pretty sleepy. He looks rather calm and amiable, the doctor said. Would you like me to pick him up first? This time? As a matter of fact, I wasn't too eager to catch hold of him, but somehow I thought I ought to be the one to pick him up first, since he was my dinosaur and all. Besides, I didn't want Dr. Zemer to think I was really scared or anything. So I said, no thanks, I'll pick him up. All right, Nate, I suggest you hold him just back of the front legs. He has a short neck and I don't think he could reach you that way. Be easy now, we don't want to frighten him. I reached down slowly and slid my hands around his body. He wriggled at first, but didn't try to bite. His skin felt all warm and sort of slidey and loose. When he seemed to be used to my hands being there, I picked him up slowly and set him down on the kitchen scales. He kicked a few times while he was in the air, but he settled down again when he was on the scales. He lay there quietly with his thick tail hanging over the edge. I guess he just wanted to sleep. And there he is, a picture of him. We looked at the dial on the scales and it said 4¼ pounds. The doctor wrote that down in a little notebook. Of course, he said, this is not his original weight. We'll have to approximate that. We'll gather as much grass and leaves as we had before, as close as we can estimate it, and then we'll weigh that and see how much he's eaten. We gathered the grass and leaves, and it weighed just a little over a pound. Your baby's got a good appetite, the doctor said. He put away over 1/3 of his own weight. Let's see now, that means that he weighed approximately 3 pounds when he hatched. He wrote that down in his notebook. And now, for his length, he took a tape measure out of his pocket, sat him down on the ground. Would you, Nate? I lifted him down on the ground again, and we stretched out his tail and measured him from tip to tip. 13½ inches he was. The doctor wrote that down and then measured his head and the length of his tail and his legs, and he wrote the measurements down each time in his notebook. He was awfully careful about it. What kind of dinosaur did you say this is? I asked him. Triceratops, he said, measuring a hind leg. Let's see, 4.5 inches, pelvis to metatarsals. Is a triceratops poisonous, Dr. Zemer? I asked. No, sir, Nate. These fellows had too much armor to need poison. Femur, 2 inches, no, 1.75. I'm not accustomed to working on bones with the skin on it. Do you think I'd ask you to pick him up if I thought he was poisonous? Tibia, 2 inches. He was going on at a great rate. How big does a triceratops get to be? I asked when he was finished. Sometimes more than 20 feet. And it's a... Oh, I misread this. What Nate said was a triceratops. And Dr. Zemer says, and it's a triceratops, not pops, my boy. 20 feet, I said. You mean 20 inches, don't you? No, I mean 20 feet. That includes the tail, of course. They might weigh up to 10 tons or so at full size. 10 tons? I almost fell over backward with surprise. My gosh, think of all the grass it would take to feed him. How long does it take him to get that big? I was pretty worried because anything that big would eat up all of Mrs. Parsons' grass in just one day, I should think. Oh, it would take a good long time, I'm sure. The fact is, though, we don't really know much about how fast these animals grew because we've never had any live ones before. We know about their size, all right, because we found their skeletons, but we don't know how long it took them to reach full size, or how long they lived, or their rate of growth. That's why we must keep careful records on this little fellow. Science is going to be very interested. Just then I heard the screen door slam at the back of the house, and Cynthia came running out with a paper in her hand. Dr. Zemer, she called, there's a telegram for you. It's from Washington. It came on the telephone and I wrote it down. She gave the paper to the doctor. He looked at it and his eyebrows went up and down a couple of times while he read it. I had to write it pretty fast, Cynthia said, so my handwriting wasn't too good. Oh, pshaw, the doctor said. The old skeptic. Here, Nate, read this, and he handed me the paper. I read it. Cynthia wasn't kidding about the handwriting. It was about all I could do to make it out. It says, Dr. Oscar Zemer, care of Walter Twitchell, Freedom, New Hampshire. Quit comedy, Zemer, you buffoon. Too hot here for jokes. Kennedy. Well, how do you like that? The doctor said. The old fool. He never has trusted me since I put the beef bone in his Paleosinthecus collection. Come on, Cynthia, let's go call him up and tell him to get a move on, or we'll give the news to the Museum of Natural History. That will bring him all right. They went into the house, and I sat down under the maple tree in the shade. It was awfully hot in the sun. Pretty soon, Joe Chapigny came along and sat down with me. How's your lizard, Nate? He said. It's no lizard. It's a dinosaur. I bet you it isn't. I asked my pop about it, and he said there wasn't any such thing as a dinosaur. He said nobody ever saw any. Some crazy scientist found a lot of old bones, and they just made up all that business about dinosaurs out of their heads. There were 2 dinosaurs, I said. Just because nobody's seen them doesn't mean there weren't any. And besides, if there weren't any dinosaurs, how come I've got one right here? Phooey, that's no dinosaur, Joe said. It is, too. It's a triceratops, or something like that, and if a triceratops isn't a dinosaur, I'd like to know what is. Phooey, Joe Chapigny said. Sometimes Joe's an awfully hard guy to argue with. And that's the end of chapter 6. And now I hope you all have a good afternoon or evening, and I can't wait to see you next time. I love you guys. Bye. Over and out.